starting point, because I think whenever we're transforming, we want to really understand the problem that we're solving. So understanding a problem and having a need for a solution, I think, is the starting point. But I mean, knowledge strategy, I really believe, is the glue that kind of holds everything together.
Hello and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host, Jeremy D'Souza, and today we have a technology expert with us on the show. But before I introduce you to our amazing guest, allow me to first introduce you to the magic of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual, no-code chatbot platform, available across 14 channels with 35,000 bots created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. But we're not just a chatbot platform anymore. We've also launched a brand new state-of-the-art live chat module you should definitely check out. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc.com, TechWorld, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, the video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our amazing guest, a digital diva determined to redefine digital disruption. With over 6 years of experience designing and deploying digital knowledge solutions across the globe, Samantha Middlebrook is a leading Australian knowledge management consultant. Her passion for innovation and customer experience, in addition to a breadth of experience in the knowledge management space, has led to a wide range of success across both government and private sectors. With consulting experience across a range of sectors, including telco, utilities, finance, health, insurance, aged care, and disabilities, Samantha has been able to build a product suite that stands out in the market. From conducting discovery workshops to extrapolate business benefits and a case for change, to designing enterprise knowledge strategies that streamline governance models, Samantha focuses on providing quantifiable benefits for organizations. Samantha, we're really thrilled to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so Samantha, my first question to you is, how can we make CX quantifiable? Which parameters should businesses consider and measure, and how do we go about evaluating these parameters?
A great question. So the first piece of advice that I have for you is that cool projects cost money. And so we need to be able to prove the value. And that's whether you're working internally in an organization or you're consulting externally. So the other thing to think about is if you're looking at digital transformation, technology is generally not cheap. So you need to find some money somewhere. And when you're finding money, it's really about bringing people along for the journey with you so they understand their investment and what they're going to get from it. Your biggest secret weapon, I would say, is that you have to be able to show value. So you need to show value in what you're doing. And by thinking about that, it actually helps you set up to understand, is the project that you're creating actually worth it? A lot of the time I'll work with clients and what they'll say to me is that, we want a chatbot. And when I ask them, but why do you want a chatbot? They're not really sure. They want the shiniest, next sexiest piece of technology, but they haven't really thought about the business problem that they're trying to solve for. So whenever we're looking at value, we're really talking about problem statements. What's keeping your executives up at night? What's making your customers run away from the organization? And what's making your employees really unhappy? And when we think about those things, there's a huge amount of money and savings that we can find. Some of the really easy ones to calculate are things like customer churn. How much does it cost you to onboard a customer, but how much does it cost you to actually lose a customer? There's a huge piece around employee engagement. So how engaged are your employees? How long does it take to train somebody in your business? And what is the speed to competency, and how can you extrapolate that out to a cost? The other thing is around quality. How are processing errors costing your business? So when you tell a customer a piece of misinformation, what does that mean for your business? Not only from a brand awareness piece, but actual dollars in the bank as well. So all of those things have a dollar value, and then that will help you with your case for change.
Definitely. You can't just look at the new fancy schmancy, really sexy piece of technology and just say, I want that. You need to have a reason why you want that. You need to, drive value to the stakeholders, to the customers, to everyone. That makes a lot of sense, Samantha.
Yeah.
My next question to you is, what is it like being in the center of technological advancements, business objectives, and customer expectations? And how can we align all of these together?
It's a really exciting place to be. So it's like a boiling pot within an organization, and it's really where all the magic starts to happen. So what we already touched on before was that when we start to look at these three areas, quite often when we look at transformation projects, they're very siloed. The business folk will come into a workshop and they have an idea of what they want to achieve from a business perspective. Someone will be representing the customer and somebody will be representing technology. And quite often nobody is aligned. So they're kind of running off in different directions. And really those first couple of workshops that you facilitate, it's almost like herding cats because everyone has a different opinion. The thing that we want to always think about is one, we don't want to ever throw technology at a business problem and just hope that it sticks. Because when we design without the customer in mind, we're going to run into a lot of problems. And it's not really about just the project life cycle, it's around how we carry this into BAU and how we keep on looking at continuous improvement and changing and innovating as we implement things. The second piece of advice I would give you is you have to know your customer. So there's no point designing a solution when you don't really understand who the solution is for. I love to do an activity called a persona on a page, and it's really around empathy mapping of your different customers or the person that you're looking at. Working at. So you think about what is the customer thinking, feeling, saying, and doing, and it gives you a whole range of different perspectives when you're looking at your design as well. I did this activity over in the US with one of our customers. They're a healthcare customer, and what we were doing was implementing a self-service bot on the website, and it was actually externally facing, and it was around one of their recruitment strategies that they had at the executive level, and they were trying to recruit some nurses because there was a change in legislation which meant that for every patient that they had, they needed to have a certain number of nurses. So when we started looking at the nurse's persona, we started to think of different things. So for instance, there was no point a nurse calling through to a talent acquisition line, fingers crossed, hoping that they could get through, when really, though, that line only operated in business hours. And what we found out, or what we realized when we started to do this, was nurses take their lunch break at like 3 a.m. in the morning. So you need to really think about the solution there. Another piece of work that we did at Panviva was working with a telco, and we were working with field service workers. So we had to look at the demographic there. You know, they were kind of 50 plus. They'd been at the organization for many, many years. And what they wanted to know is like answers really quickly, and they didn't want to be forced to read. So all of these things you need to look at. So you need to look at what is the technology stack you're working with, who is the person you're trying to design for. And then the third thing I would say from the business perspective is understanding your business's moments of truth. And what I mean by a moment of truth, think about it as a fork in the road when it's part of your customer journey. If it goes really well, you have a successful customer experience. If it goes really poorly, it's catastrophic, basically. And the way that you do that is by mapping out your customer journeys and really understanding those sticky points. Does that make sense? And when you do this properly, that's when the magic happens, like I mentioned before. So that telco that I spoke to you about previously, before they implemented this digital solution, what it would take them was 9 minutes and 4 seconds to try and find information. And when they implemented our bot solution, powered by knowledge, they could get the answer in 6 seconds. So straight away, it's a great story. And then you've got the savings there as well.
Absolutely. And it was really interesting what you said about the nurses, because yes, you definitely have to get into, the mind and the life of the people you're designing for.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just pick up something, run of the mill and say, hey, this is going to work for everybody.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you think about self-service options and different demographics, if we look at aged care, for instance, and in Australia, there was a huge aged care reform a few years ago, and we had something called a My Aged Care service, which said that the way that funding was got to be distributed out to patients was very different. So rather than me going to kind of a family friend to get care, it was all around being the services being distributed more fairly. So it had to go through a centralised portal. Now, when this change started happening, a lot of the aged care organisations here in Australia started to look at digital channels, the way their website was operating and self-service options. But they hadn't really thought about who was going to be using that service. So predominantly, to be able to get to access funds, you have to be over 65 years of age. So not digitally native. So it's really around finding the best fitting solution and looking at the data that you have as well, and then seeing that the secondary user in that example was actually the carers. So maybe it was your mum and dad was going into care, so you were younger and you were more digitally savvy, so there was different messaging there that went along.
Absolutely. And because of that, they probably still needed help from somebody or the other in order to get access to those funds.
That's right.
Maybe not, directly in a monetary sort of help, but still needed help. Someone on their own would not be able to take care of that. Samantha, the next question to you is, it ties into the previous one in some way. Um, can digital transformation actually drive better customer experiences? And how can we get, how can we get ourselves to correlate the two of them, and on what parameters?
I mean, it definitely can influence it and give a better customer experience, but it's almost like a double-edged sword. If you don't do it correctly, you can really drive your customers away. So when we look at kind of what's happened in the customer experience landscape in the last 10 years, or maybe 20 years, let's say, if we think about a more traditional customer service scenario, when we were engaging with an organization, it may be face-to-face, via retail, or it was via phone. So we had two channels, and that was two channels to deliver knowledge to and two channels to provide answers to customers. And then we started to introduce some more exciting things. So we introduced IVR into call center land that said, hey, we can do some pretty fancy things and tell you, who you need to speak to and direct your calls. And then call centers started to really evolve into contact centers, which said that, hang on, maybe I can look at instant messaging or email. And as we introduce more and more channels, the probability of getting something wrong is increased. So if you think about, every channel needs to have a knowledge nugget delivered up to them. And the thing that frustrates people more than anything is being told different information at different channels. So there's a really great statistic from Forrester that says that 73% of customers say that a company valuing their time is one of the most important things from a customer perspective. And when we have customers that have to continuously call up an organization to resolve an issue, it creates a huge amount of frustration. And when we start to add in things like social channels and social media, it's very easy for that frustration to be vented out to the world for other customers to see it. So it's a bit of a snowball effect. And that's not to scare the listeners and the viewers, because there is a way of doing it. You really need to crawl before you run a marathon. And so as you're introducing different digital channels, you need to kind of tick them off and say, hey, can we do this one right? And can we add another one? And with that, again, it's really about understanding your customer base and that persona and knowing which channels to add in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I like what you said about the fact that if it's not done right, it's going to be a big mess. And you need to value the customer's time. You need to get it right the first time around.
Yeah.
I've seen like this happen so many times where a customer has to reach out to customer care, and then they're like, oh, this is not my department, let me transfer you to this place. And then the other guy is like, oh, I need to transfer you here. And then you just spend the entire afternoon wasting your time over there. What we at Engati notice is that we don't want that happening to anyone who uses that. We don't want that happening to the company that uses our products. We don't want that happening to the customer who interacts with that company. So with our new live chat module, we actually have what we call contextual routing, where it goes to the relevant agent the first time around based on the subject matter, based on, let's say, even the language. So they
Mhm.
don't have to keep hopping around from place to place.
Perfect. And that's exactly what you want to be able to do. Providing context at the right moment in time is really important. And I know a little bit later we're going to talk about knowledge and how a knowledge strategy helps. And that's really important because, you know, when you have information and you add context and a governance framework around it, it becomes knowledge, and then it becomes valuable to both, you know, your business and your customers, which is really important.
Absolutely. So since you said that it needs to be done right, how would you define digital disruption? What exactly do you think is its main role in enhancing a customer experience?
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I cut you off because I'm so excited about this question. When I saw it come through, I really loved it. So the first thing that I want you to think about is the word disruption really has negative connotations. When we think about it in our everyday life, you know, if you have a flight disruption, it takes out hours and hours out of your day. You know, back when we could fly, it seems like a distant memory, but it causes a huge amount of stress. And if you think about a child at school and you look at their report card and they are disruptive, again, it's really negative. They're causing a problem. Quite often in my career, I've been described as a disruptor because I go into organizations and really start to shake things up. But what I want you to think about with digital disruption is that it's literally about pulling the rug out from underneath an organization. And it's about forcing change, change of expectations, and really challenging cultural norms and industry norms as well. So when we talk about digital transformation, it's a lot smoother, it seems. It's around the strategy, and it's the, you know, the stepping stones. When disruption comes, you need to react right away, otherwise you'll be left behind. So what it does is it allows the evolution, and that's what we've seen in the customer experience space. You know, you just need to think about Uber, Netflix, Amazon. They're the big ones when you think about how we've changed customer experience. And it's because we've really realigned expectations for customers and put the control back on them. So it's really, really important. And that's what the role that I really see that it plays. It helps us evolve. You know, most recently, or what we're living and breathing right now, is the pandemic COVID-19. And it's, you know, there is a silver lining in what we're seeing, because the disruption that it's caused has really forced us to move forward in a lot of spaces in the digital space. So in healthcare particularly, and in virtual health and in telehealth, we've seen huge changes really being forced to happen. So something that maybe we thought was going to happen in 10 years' time, especially around preventative health, we don't have time to plan for it. It's happening now. And some really interesting things that I've seen in that space is that in Australia in April, some of the numbers that we started to see in telehealth were huge. So the pandemic was kind of announced in February, March here in Australia. And then by April, what we saw that there was already 4.3 million health services delivered to over 3 million Australians within that first month. It's huge. And in the US, telehealth is tracking to be a $185.6 billion business by 2026. But it's not just about those numbers. It's about what does that allow the general public to be able to do. It means that people can now access healthcare from their home. It means it takes less time. Quite often it's more cost effective, and it means that people can get the help that they need, which then aligns into preventative care, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And it actually helps people get access to healthcare and
Mhm.
to information too much faster than, the traditional routes.
Yeah.
Um,
With
yeah,
that as well, it is really forcing us to really rethink the traditional way that we look at health. So I just saw a press release this week in Australia around introducing virtual emergency department triage. So rather than having hundreds of people waiting in an emergency room, how can you triage things virtually? I'm actually on maternity leave at the moment, and I just had a baby 13
Right.
weeks ago, and it was quite an interesting time to be pregnant because a lot of the processes that the hospital were going through were very different. Some of the tests and things that women have been going through for many years have actually been put on hold because of COVID. And what they were finding is that, there wasn't actually a need to do a lot of those invasive tests. They just did it because we've always done it this way, which is really the thing that stifles any innovation, just sticking to what we've always done. So I think it's definitely breaking down those barriers, which is exciting.
So yeah, the pandemic did cause disruption, which actually in some ways took us years ahead of what we have been at.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even look at things like the ability for people to be able to work from home now. We had lots of executives, within a certain demographic that were very scared of letting people work from home. Quite often when I look at cost reductions for organizations, the biggest thing that kind of hemorrhages money is multiple locations, so physical locations. And we would always challenge executives and say, do you actually need this building? And they were very scared of having people not within eyesight. So again, really exciting times.
Absolutely. It's got savings up for them, and it's actually got their employees to believe that they trust them too. So it's empowering in ways. Samantha, how can we go about designing enterprise knowledge strategies? Is that the starting point of digital transformation?
Starting point, because I think whenever we're transforming, we want to really understand the problem that we're solving. So understanding a problem and having a need for a solution, I think, is the starting point. But I mean, knowledge strategy, I really believe, is the glue that kind of holds everything together. So as you mentioned in my introduction, my background has been in knowledge management for many years. And I remember when I first started consulting, it was a very dry topic. I would start talking about it and I would see people's eyes glaze over and very bored and thinking that I was talking about really dusty old documents inside a library, which is not what knowledge management is about. So I think in the last kind of year and a half or 2 years, it's become a little bit sexier with the introduction of new tech, which is really exciting. When we think about our knowledge strategy, what we always want to think about is having a single source of truth. So when we have a single source of truth, it means that we have consistency and confidence in the answers that we're providing. And that was all well and good when we only needed one repository. But as we mentioned earlier, digital transformation is about having all these different touch points, and every touch point has a different channel. So we've got, a voice channel, we've got web chat, we've got chatbot, we've got IVR, we've got email, we've got all of these exploding, and Alexa and all of those kind of things, which are really taking off from a CX perspective. The thing is that we need to make sure no matter which channel a customer goes to, they're provided the right information every time. The right information is important, but when we look at customer experience, we also know personalization is really important, and you have to look at the way that your knowledge is structured. So I've been involved in a really exciting project at my company Panviva for a couple of years now, which was really around how we redefine the way knowledge is created and curated. And we created something called a digital orchestrator, which has a single source of truth, so knowledge repository, but it says, hang on, how can I be a little bit more intelligent than that? So if you think about a really long policy document that contact center agent might need to read, it has all of the rules and system instructions and all of those things, all of the good stuff that a contact center agent needs. That's an important document, but that document is no good for a chatbot, and it's no good Alexa reading that out. So it's really about how you curate snippets of that, and we call them knowledge nuggets, and you deliver them out to every channel so you can connect those digital dots. And like we mentioned before, there's nothing more frustrating than speaking to a consultant and getting one answer and accessing information via another channel and getting a different answer. So that knowledge is really that living, breathing ecosystem that sits within your transformation strategy. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. Samantha, is there anything else that you'd like to inform our audience about? Any other thoughts that you'd like to share with them today?
You know, when I first started consulting, I was a little bit of a perfectionist. You know, I'd spend hours and hours, doing briefs and all of those kind of things. And when I moved into more of the technology space, as some of my colleagues introduced to me, and the concept of an MVP, so a minimum viable product. And to me, coming from a business background, that was a really scary thought. The thought of something just being kind of like a snackable bite-sized project, and then what happens next, what happens with BAU. But over the years, what I've actually realized that done not perfect is the best mentality you can have for a transformation project. And too often my customers or any organization will get stuck in what I call planning paralysis, where they go in loops and loops around exactly how a project should work. The best way that you can start your transformation project is to start it and to learn from your mistakes. So that would be my takeaway. It's done, not perfect, so you can learn and move on to your next exciting piece.
Absolutely. Done not perfect actually gives you a chance to keep doing more. If you get it
Exactly.
perfect first time, you're probably going to stop. And
That's right.
yeah, there is nothing such as perfection. It has to be continuous growth, continuous learning. So I totally relate to what you just said. Samantha, thank you so much for all your time, all your wonderful insights. They've been really amazing. Thanks for joining us here today, and congratulations on your new baby.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon, and I'll chat to you guys soon.
Likewise. Guys, thanks for joining us today on Engati CX. We will be back with a new episode and a new expert really soon. So stay tuned and hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on an episode.